Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. The world is in disorder. Why? How did this happen? Don't worry, we have frameworks. Today, Pranay will explain to us how we can think about the world order, and we will fight with Pranay, and world disorder will grow. Welcome to Watching the Wheels. I'm Amit, and these are my good friends Shruti and Pranay. Or if we go by alphabetical order, Pranay and Shruti. Alphabetical order really matters. Academics suffer from this because if their surname starts with a letter that comes later, like Varma, then they are in trouble because the name gets listed last. I am sure this has an impact on many things: career, self esteem, ego, interpersonal relations. The right way to do it is alphabetical order of first name, like Amit. That's how we roll. And parents, please watch out. Now, what will happen is parents will start naming their kids things like Aardvark and all that to kind of get past this, or Ashe with four A's at the first, like these, parents of Gen Zs do. I mean, this is the only possible reason to do that kind of thing, but never mind. I wish to inform you, dear viewers, that an attack was unleashed upon me when I joined the recording. My headphones were like this, right? My headphones were like this, and Shruti immediately remembered a film called Jaani Dushman and started telling us about it. And I said, wait. This is content. Don't just tell us. Tell everyone. Shruti, tell everyone. Jaani Dushman, go.
So, Jaani Dushman is the greatest terrible movie that I think Indian cinema has ever given us. Though I'm sure our wonderful listeners will leave us more options that are in the running in the comments. And it has Arman Kohli relaunched as Munshi Kohli and Manisha Koirala, who play Ichhadhari Nags and Nagins who are there to take revenge. I won't repeat the story because there isn't much of a story, nor will I repeat the cast because just imagine everyone's in the film. And in this process, the only way we know which Manisha Koirala is in the present versus the past, and same with Arman Kohli, is whether they have that Nag money on their head, which is what I thought Amit was aiming for. Of course, Pranay had a different interpretation of the same visual. Pranay?
Yeah, Mithunda from Disco Dancer.
All right, so in one day, I have been called Mithunda and Manisha Koirala. I think I'll prefer to be Mithun for the day. So, guys, in our last episode, we spoke about how we take your comments really seriously. And to prove that, we are doing the next section based on one of your comments. After the pilot episode came out, a reader named Aman Soni left this comment. You have no idea how happy this has made me. Can't wait for you guys to help us make sense of what's happening in the world. Indeed, a very messy place. Right? And Pranay responded to that by saying, thanks. This comment gave me some episode ideas. So when I saw Pranay's comment there, I was pretty thrilled. I said, right, content, right? And we have that. So Pranay, go ahead. What thoughts sparked off in your head, and where are we going with it today?
Right. So this was a very big question. Of course, the world is messy in so many ways, and probably we need to unpack this over many, many episodes. And I thought for today, we'll just try to make sense of the world disorder. In the sense, we'll look at international relations, geopolitics, and try to make sense of where the world is on that dimension. And probably we'll come to other areas as we go along in this journey. Right. So, responding to Aman Soni's question, what I thought is I'll try to explain three frameworks through which I see the changes in geopolitics, and probably we can discuss over on them, and also probably they'll serve as reference points for our viewers to analyze the world in their own way. All right, so let's get started. Let me begin with the main idea that I wanted to tell people here is that the world that we all used to live in is no longer here in terms of geopolitics and international relations. In fact, if you are under 50, your entire world was spent inside one specific configuration of the world, which no longer exists. And it was there for such a long period that we thought that that was the natural state of affairs. But it was really not the case, right? So just imagine the world that we were in from 1990 roughly to around 2015-16, right? This was a world in which the US was a sole superpower. after the Cold War ended in 1991. There was broadly a consensus on things like free trade. WTO was founded around 1995. China joined it. There were multilateral institutions, which, however imperfect, there was still an architecture of global governance which people largely agreed upon and thought this is for the good, right? Liberal democracy was also thought of as generally an aspiration for many nation states, right? So this was the world that we were in, and we thought this was always how the world was before it, right? But that is really not the case. This world order which we talked about was constructed based on some specific ingredients, and that's where I want to begin with the first framework, where I explain how do we define what is a world order and what has changed from that period which we were used to since 1990 versus what we are seeing today. So now we begin with the first framework that I wanted to discuss. What makes a world order? Right. So this is a big term. Often it's used and thrown around very easily. But in geopolitics and international relations, it means something very specific. A world order, this comes from the book, Henry Kissinger's book called The World Order, and it had defined it in a very nice way. What it says is that any order in a geopolitical sense rests on two pillars. These two pillars are power. Of course, power matters in international relations, which is an amoral space. Matsya exists there, right? So military strength, economic rise, all of them are really important. But power is not the only thing which matters in international relations. Another thing which matters is the idea of legitimacy. Legitimacy is a set of commonly accepted rules that others consider just, and they are not coerced onto others, right? So in that sense, when we talk about the world order, any nation state, which is a small nation state, is always trying to survive, and its survival largely depends only on the power it has. Right. But if you want to be a great power, on a power which tries to establish some order in the world, then you're not just seeking power, you're also seeking legitimacy. And in fact, what you're seeking is the intersection of both, which I call authority. And you will see this framework on the screen, where there's a Venn diagram where at the intersection of legitimacy and power is what is called authority, right? And this is what all great powers aspire for. Okay. And why is this important? Because at all times you just don't want to exercise your power, because every exercise of power creates enemies, creates resentment. So you ideally want to exercise power only when there are extreme circumstances, when things go wrong and you want to bring others onto your order back again, right? And the way then great powers assert their supremacy over others is through this idea of legitimacy. So what they say is they create some international organizations, institutions, and based on that, they try to promote certain values. And the whole idea is cognitive, right? So in the sense that people start accepting those values that the great powers put forth as the right and just ones, such that even when there is conflict within this, that is resolved within this framework instead of going out of it and someone trying to establish their own order, right? So that's what authority gives you. Now, if you see the world order before 2020 or so, you see how the US built authority, right? First, it identified that liberty and democracy are the values that all international order should promote. So this is something which is America's contribution to the world order making. It built multilateral institutions. We know most of them: WTO, the Bretton Woods, NATO. All of these were created largely by the US. Right? US took the forefront. And more importantly, the US agreed to bind itself by some of these rules, right? So it is counterintuitive. If it was just power, they would have broken all the rules at all times. But hypocrisy plays a very important role in international relations, and the US played it well, right? It agreed to certain times to submit itself to these rules, to give a sense and important veneer that these are rules which even we agree to, even though we are the most powerful. And it offered tangible benefits to countries which joined this order, right, through security cover, economic assistance, technology transfer, etc. So this combination of things made the US not just the most powerful actor but also the most authoritative one. Okay, so now once you have understood this framework, we can now make sense of what is happening today. So what really is happening is US's power hasn't reduced, right? US, in terms of military strength, in terms of whole lot of parameters, the density of talent, etc., US still leads many other countries. But where the US led order has faced the challenge is on the other side, which is the legitimacy front, right? Its authority is declining because its legitimacy is declining. And why has that happened, right? So you can think of what I said, right? Earlier, the US itself was willing to accept certain bounds to its own power. But now it is very different, right? In the pre 2020 era, when there was Trump 1.0, there was this idea of the fair and reciprocal trade, which only got exacerbated in Trump 2.0. Then there were periods when there was a withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There was withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Agreement, all those, right? From 2020 to 26 also, you have seen many things. Of course, Trump 2.0's tariff shock, the hollowing out of the WTO, which no longer works. And all these are parameters which tell us that legitimacy of the US has declined a lot. And something that the US spent decades building has now gone away, right? So that's why the US led world order no longer exists in the way it existed after the fall of the USSR. But I still call it world disorder because there is no other alternative which has emerged in the same way, right? So think about China, which is the second most powerful nation state. But what is China's view of the world order, right? It does have some organizations it has established. There is a global governance initiative, there is a Belt and Road initiative. It has tried to mirror many of the things that the US did, right? But it does not have any normative framework to offer beyond non interference and sovereignty, right? Just like the US had ideas about democracy, liberty, etc. So at least the ideas that China talks about aren't that appealing to the other nation states. And secondly, China also has this hierarchical worldview, this idea about middle kingdom mentality, where it sees other nation states not even nominally as their equals. So because of that, an alternative to the idea of the US world order hasn't come up. Right? So hence we are in this space where one order is crumbling, but the other hasn't replaced it. And then that's why I call this phase world disorder. This is a terminology many people have used before, and I find that it makes sense in this context, right? So that's what we are in, and that's my first framework. Think of how countries become powerful, but more importantly, also think about whether they are becoming authoritative, think about their legitimacy and how they are building it. So with that, I want to ask both of you, Amit and Shruti, what do you think of this?
Pranay, thanks a ton for that. That's beautifully laid out, like everything that you do. I want to take a view of frameworks in general and this framework in particular in a way that is both respectful and skeptical. So let me explain that. Respectful because when it comes to foreign policy, I'm a complete newcomer. I know nothing. You've studied it for more than a decade. You know it very deeply. So therefore, I'm going to pose all of these as me thinking aloud. And no, and for the viewers, I should point out that therefore they should not treat our comments equally. Pranay's got a lot of authoritative study behind it and legitimacy as well, and I don't. But here are my thoughts on frameworks in general. We make sense of the world by telling simple stories. No simple story can actually capture the complexity of the world, and those simple stories are useful for us, and it's a good thing. But we should also be wary that they don't capture all of the truth. There's a saying that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So we should keep that also in mind. Now, when I look at some of these foreign policy frameworks, what strikes me is that your sample size of history is very low. Nation states haven't been around for terribly long. There aren't a lot of events to go down on. And therefore, every narrative is inherently suspect because you are going on very little. Now, when it comes to this particular framework of legitimacy and authority, it makes a lot of sense to me in a domestic politics context that obviously an authoritarian government would have authority but no legitimacy. Whereas if you're a democratically elected government, you would have much more legitimacy because you represent the will of the people. And in a wherever there's a slide away from democracy happening, you would have a little less legitimacy, and so on and so forth. From my layman's perspective, I don't really understand the relevance of this in foreign relations. It strikes to me that the whole game there is power and shared interests. For example, all throughout the Cold War, you could say that, okay, in a certain sense, there was a world order and the US had legitimacy, but it appeared to have legitimacy only for its allies. Its enemies did not consider it legitimate in any way, and its allies only considered it legitimate because it suited them to do so. Everything that the US would put forth, or proponents of this theory would put forth as a sign of legitimacy, that the US saying that we also abide by these treaties, these rules also abide by us. At the end of the day, everybody knows they have the power to go beyond it, and they get stuff done because they apply pressure in different ways. So I'm not sure how that legitimacy argument applies. If all your friends think you're legitimate, but all your enemies without exception think you're not legitimate, then where is that sort of argument? So when we speak of the sort of the power legitimacy, when we hyphenate those terms, instead of power and legitimacy, I think of it as power and goodwill. That at any particular point in time, you have power because of all the levers that you hold, and if you behave well, certain countries will have goodwill towards you, and your enemies obviously won't. But that goodwill can go up and down depending on how you behave. If you behave with the kind of rashness that the US has behaved in recent times with these crazy tariffs and all that, the goodwill goes down. But I'm not sure why that phrase legitimacy nevertheless comes into it. So again, just thinking aloud and responding to the framework, I'm not really sure how it applies, because in a sense, people can have credibility, but where does legitimacy come from there?
Yeah, if I could respond, we are not talking about the legitimacy of the US. We are talking about the legitimacy of the order that the US created, right? So, in that sense, even though there would have been enemies of the US, they were ready to submit themselves to the order, right? So, people were still thinking of solutions within the UN framework, within the WTO framework. Still, the enemies very happy to use the dollar as the reserve currency for their transactions, right? So, in that sense, whatever disagreements there were, and there were a lot of them, they were within that order which the US had created. That was the legitimacy.
But my question is, can't 100% of that be explained by shared interests and the pressures that the US could apply? Like, what part of it is not explained by shared interests and incentives and explained by legitimacy? And
Yeah.
if that is zero, then
No, so just like you said, there were nation states which were antagonistic to the US, right? That didn't go away. So, in that sense, shared interests were definitely not entirely 100%. And yet, even those people were petitioning the UN or saying that US is not doing right by the UN standard, something which US had created, right? So, in that sense, there's a framework which you accept as the upper bound, and you're not willing to look beyond it, which has become the case now, right? People are looking even beyond what the UN has. So you can think of it as that legitimacy puts an upper bound, a ceiling of things that other nation states were willing to do. That ceiling is off now.
So, if I may add on the legitimacy question, Amit, I think of what brings the legitimacy is when those who set the rules are willing to abide by them, even when it's very inconvenient and costly for them to abide by those rules, right? And this is where actually the US signaled a very high degree of legitimacy. Now, my framing is very Thomas Schelling in its nature. He had this wonderful essay in the early 50s called An Essay on Bargaining, which then became one of the chapters in Strategy of Conflict. So this is very much that way of viewing the world. Now, there are two parts to it, according to me. Power by itself, with or without shared interests, is not costless to enforce. In fact, the entire point of being a powerful nation is that you should be able to have it go your way without taking on the enormous enforcement costs and disciplining. So I think the legitimacy part is you deposit enough, whether you call it goodwill or whether you call it the very standard, like, Odyssey tying his hands to the mast kind of thing, which is what the United States did, at least with the WTO. I can't speak so much to other multilateral organizations. I just don't know enough about them. But it very much submitted to the rules of the WTO, even when there was a dispute that would be adjudicated against the US interests, right? That's what brought in the legitimacy, and that's what dramatically reduces the cost of enforcement, which actually makes the country even more powerful, which is without having to, impose sanctions or threaten war or any other unilateral action. And, most geopolitical enforcement actions like this, it's a little bit like cutting your nose to spite your face, right? Like, you are going to take a big hit when you impose these questions. So, that's the way I think about the legitimacy piece. But again, my reference point for this is reading like a lot of Pranay's work and reading Thomas Schelling. So if I'm a little too aligned with that worldview, that's perhaps the reason. If I were to go against this argument, or rather, like, play devil's advocate, I would say that there is no question of a legitimacy which only gets addressed within a certain block of people who adopt those rules, right? So only if you're a WTO member is this legitimate. Now, that doesn't really prevent you from having the world blow up if, North Korea is not willing to abide by these rules or treaties or something like that. So even the Venn diagram where you have authority and legitimacy and you're kind of this, mono superpower, so to speak, even that has very, very clear and strong limits, which we have seen even when the global order, managed to hold itself together. So I think the way I see the problem is, I think the rest of the world took too much for granted in terms of these norms surviving for a long time, and almost free rode on those norms without themselves contributing to strengthening those norms. And that's the current crisis that I see, that there is no one to pick up the mantle when the US just, drops the ball.
Nice. So, Shruti, I wanted to ask you, if we believe this is a legitimacy crisis for the US, do you think it is reversible under a different US administration? Or do you think that cat is out of the bag and there's no change which can happen now?
So I wouldn't put it as a binary of reversible versus no change can happen. But I would be very surprised if it's easily reversible. And the reason is the crisis we're in today actually has been going on for a long time. So again, I'm most familiar with the WTO as an economist. If we go back and look at what happened in 2016, Obama blocked one judge's reappointment, right? Then Trump came back and he started, general appointments blockade from 2017 or so on, right? By 2019, the quorum had collapsed. That is, we didn't have enough judges to actually adjudicate on these matters. And Biden said that he would, if he comes and takes office, then he would actually reverse all this. But Biden didn't do any of that either. Now, whether it is WTO, whether it's other tariffs, like it's the same story with the tariffs, right? So, Biden again continued a lot of the trade policy that Trump had set in place, whether it is tariffs on steel or aluminium, chips, which much more about, Pranay, including a lot of the questions, international geopolitical questions that were brought in under the realm of a domestic law, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. Same thing when it came to AUKUS as an example, right? Like, all these serious contracts and treaties getting cancelled with, like France and Australia. Like, these are not minor players where you break your word when it's inconvenient. The way the US administration behaved when it came to pulling out of Afghanistan, which is, one of the wars and rebuilding efforts where a lot of his allies had chipped in and had a lot at stake. And the US just kind of up and went without really talking to any of the allies. Same thing when it came to the Paris Agreement. So I actually see this as a through line between the last 3-4 administrations. It started with Obama. It, of course, intensified, and Trump's first administration just upended all these norms. And Biden didn't really reverse them even when he had a chance. So when I look at this problem from inside Washington, I see no bipartisan consensus to actually move things back to the old order. In fact, what I see is no consensus in Congress really. And everyone's waiting for the judiciary, which is the US Supreme Court, to strike down tariffs or, help. So it's like people ask me around the world, about the US Supreme Court's decision on something. That can't be the final checkpoint or the savior of the global order. So I don't see it reversing. I would be extremely surprised if it reversed itself anytime soon. And even if it reversed itself, no president can guarantee his or her successor in the United States. I mean, this is not China, right? So you have a problem where at the end of the 4 years, given what's happened with Trump 1 and Trump 2, you may be back in the same situation, because there is something which is much more fundamentally broken in American politics when it comes to this kind of consensus over foreign affairs.
Can I quickly think aloud again and ask a sort of layperson's question about whether a particular analogy is correct? Like here I'm thinking of one of our worst finance ministers, Pranab Mukherjee, and what he did with retrospective taxation, right? That when he applied that retrospective taxation on Vodafone, fundamentally what he did was that he broke trust. There was an understanding that there is a rule of law and there are certain norms that are set in place. And the one thing you won't do is you won't change them retrospectively, as if you do and say that, okay, from 5 years ago, those rules that applied then no longer apply. I am saying that you have to pay me taxes for that time. And once that trust is broken, it's very hard to bring it back, right? And that will have an effect on investment, that will have an effect on everything. And has a similar thing happened here, that as Pranay just pointed out, the system is what has legitimacy. That is what the term applies to. The US is the most powerful player within that system, but the system has legitimacy because the US has been playing by those rules of the system. And the moment it stops doing so, and the moment it goes off in these arbitrary directions, that trust is broken, the system loses legitimacy, and it's very hard to get that back, because like you said, the next president may not do these things, but the one after that could. Once you've broken the trust, right, okay, then all bets are off, and it would, the trust that you break in a year could take decades to build back. Would you broadly agree with that?
Yeah, I would broadly agree with that. Just to add one caveat, it's not that US wasn't breaking the rules in that order, it was. But the fact that it was able to break the rules and yet say to the people that, I am following the rules and this is still the order, just indicates how much legitimacy it had, right? And now when you see those, so that's what hypocrisy is always there in international relations. It's a constant. Every nation does that. But it is about doing it well enough that you're not called out for it. Whereas that's what has happened in recent times.
And there's also a double standard there, right? Like, do you do it to your allies, or do you do it with your adversaries, or do you do it with people who are kind of in between? So I think one of the biggest things that's happened is US's behavior with its allies, whether it comes to tariffs or NATO or anything else. So I think that has been the biggest shock in some sense geopolitically.
So, dear viewers, we are going to have all the links to all the pieces on this, as Shruti mentioned, down in the show notes. Let's move on to the second framework now, Pranay.
Yeah. So, Amit, first of all, I also want to say when we use the word disorder, I'm trying to mean it in a very value neutral way. As Shruti mentioned that no other country has come up to pick up the mantle from where US has left. That is an opportunity, right, for many nation states. So in fact, many good things might come out of this disorder, and we should not be despondent because of it. Okay, now let's come to the second framework. A question that always rankled me is, how is it that we got here, right? Why is it that now US is saying all over that, China is this big threat and, everyone should counter China, and at least that's what the Biden administration was doing, etc., right? But if you look at the history of China's growth, development, a lot of what it did was because of the US, right? There was a lot of FDI coming from the US, a lot of companies went there. US was at the forefront of bringing China back in the WTO in 2001. Also, after the Sino-Soviet split, it was US which established good relations with China, gave a lot of things away, right? So in fact, you can think of this that US created its own adversary for a long time, and now it is telling us that you have to counter this adversary, and why are you not doing anything, right? So why is this the case is something that always rankled me, because US has the best talent, best intellectual talent, best policy advisors. So in that sense, how could they not predict that this would happen eventually, right? That was what the question that rankled me. So when I was trying to look at some literature, one of the frameworks that I came across was this in this book called Over the Horizon by David Edelstein. And this framework tries to explain that actually this is not extraordinary. Most of the times, you have this situation where an incumbent power ends up creating its own challenger. So, which was quite counterintuitive, right? Because in general, like you said, Amit, it is about power. And so realism would mean that everything is about relative power. So whenever you see a rising power, you just confront it and you suppress it so that it doesn't rise. But that's empirically not what generally happens, which is quite counterintuitive. So, in fact, you take many examples across the last 200 years. Britain ended up creating a lot of US power, right? When US was rising 1850s, 1860s, and all that, actually, Britain could see that US is rising, but it ended up being still that US became a big power. Similarly, Europe with Bismarckian Germany, European powers could see that Bismarckian Germany is rising, and yet it was them who built the power of Germany by trading with it, by doing a lot of transfers of various sorts to them. And finally, Europe with interwar Germany was also the similar case. So these were at least 3 or 4 cases which this book talks about. And so to understand why this happens, there is this framework which you will now see on the screen. And this framework essentially talks about that apart from power, there are some other factors also which matter. One is the perceived intentions. Does the rising power seem threatening, or is it able to play this role that it is a benign power? Okay. And second is time horizons. Is each side focused on a short term gain, or is it focused on a long term gain? So these two factors really matter in determining what is the relationship between a rising power and an incumbent power. Now, if you look at this framework and try to apply it to the US China lens, which you can see on the screen, you can see there are two trends on each of the two axes, right? So there are 4 quadrants, and you can try to identify where US and China were over the last few decades, right? So if you see this period between roughly 1980s and the 2000s, right? That was the time when China was playing the long game, right? So it was pretending to be this benign power, hide your strengths, bide your time, Deng Xiaoping's time. This is the era when China was not confronting US or any power. So it was building strength. So its horizon of thinking was long. Whereas on the US side, it was a short horizon, right? US was not so worried about China from a geopolitical challenges view. It was the firms which were doing positive sum games. The firms were investing in China because it benefited them, and the Chinese firms were very happy to take the technology and then throw some US firms out later. But all of that was accepted, right, from the US side. So in that sense, US was taking the short view. So we were in this first quadrant on the top left, where conditions are conducive for cooperation, right? When the incumbent power takes a short view and the rising power takes a long view, that time you have cooperation, right? Because rising power is able to pretend that I'm not threatening, and incumbent power doesn't feel it threatening either. So that's the period, right? Now, roughly from 2010 to 2016, we moved into another quadrant, that is the top right quadrant, where it was China which changed its stance. It's after Xi Jinping came into power, you had a period where China also started playing the short horizon game, right? So there were a lot of things that China did to its neighbors. It also brought out this made in China 2025 policy, which told the world that China is now going to turn inwards. They are going to do a lot of this Atmanirbharta kind of stuff, right? So in that sense, China became very different, and it started taking the short term horizon. So now we had this situation where both the incumbent power and the rising power had short horizons, and that's when you had a mixture of skirmishes and some cooperation, so we can call it some co-opetition, right? So you had both of them. Now we are into this era where, first starting with Biden administration especially, that was the first time the US took a long horizon, right? That there was a lot of articulation that this is a structural challenge to US power. We have to do something against China, etc. Right? So in that sense, it took a long view. You can also say Trump 1.0 towards the end was also on similar lines. So that's the third quadrant on the bottom right, where you are in this period where there is an increasing possibility of a preventive war. Now, preventing war doesn't mean that there will be a full scale war. Both are nuclear powers, that cannot happen. But what it means is that will be a bunch of controls, bunch of restrictions which will be put in other domains. So that's why you are seeing, this explains why you're seeing things happening on the trade front, why you're seeing things happening on the technology front, and a whole lot of restrictions are being put. So we are in this preventive war phase generally. So that's the framework which I think is quite useful to understand how did we get there. Of course, the fourth quadrant is when both of them take a long view, and that's when you have a hegemonic war. But I don't think we are there yet. Now, my question to both of you is, if you see this, right, given what Trump is doing, a lot of the things are such that US itself is losing some of the partners that it had. And in that sense, where would we place Trump taking US into in terms of this quadrant, right? Are we seeing Trump administration taking the short view, where they are talking about that, we will just manage with China somehow, we don't need to challenge China, whereas the Biden administration, at least the rhetoric was that no, we have to take a long view, we have to confront China, and it has free ridden on a lot of things in this order, and we have to confront them. So that was the articulation there. What do you think about this framework?
I think the framework is beautiful, and thanks for articulating it so well. I think it's beautiful, especially in the personal domain, where when you look at the relations between men and women, you can easily see why different time horizons can create conflict. But I wonder if we are anthropomorphizing, if that's correct.
Yes.
I love, trying to pronounce that word, anthropomorphizing, when we ascribe the same kind of intentions to nations. Like a nation does not always behave with one voice. A state contains multitudes. There are many, many different actors which are moving in many, many different directions. Many different things are happening. So when we say that, oh, so and so has a long time horizon or so and so has a short horizon, I don't know how we can arrive at that. I think, to me, it seems that this framework in many ways is like a post facto framework, where you look at the overall effects of what has happened and you say, oh, okay, this is like what would have happened if they had had a short time horizon or a long time horizon. But I don't think there is ever an intention there, because different departments have different imperatives and incentives and are behaving in different ways. So that's my question for you, that how do we really untangle it, except for after the fact, where you're looking back in hindsight and you're saying, oh, this is what happened, and so on and so forth. Now, I agree that anthropomorphizing is a really useful shortcut, because you have to say the US is doing this, Russia is doing this. You can't just say, oh, everything is too complex, and throw up your hands. Harry Truman once famously said, give me a one-handed economist. And the reason he said that is all his advisors were saying on one hand this, on the other hand that. And he was like, no, I'm a president, I have to be decisive. Tell me one thing. So I understand that that's a useful tool to have. But I think that it goes in so many directions that after the fact, you can neatly place them in boxes and quadrants and all that. But in the moment, there is fog. In the moment, things are messy. And again, as far as the specific question about Trump is concerned, it is completely clear to me that Trump is incapable of having a long time horizon on anything. He is practically acting according to his whims and fancies, and the time horizon is very short. But that doesn't mean the US has a short time horizon. And that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. That has he achieved so much power over the system and broken the institution so much that his short time horizon is necessarily the nation's short horizon, and you've kind of compressed the multitudes into the ego of one megalomaniac. So I don't know. These are just thoughts that I'm throwing up.
Right. On the point of anthropomorphizing, there is Will Durant has this beautiful line in the Lessons of History where he says that a state has our instincts without our restraints. So the state does have instincts of the people it is made of, but it does not have the restraints because there's no morality in the internationals. So now coming to your point, right? See, I am talking again not at of the individuals. I'm talking at the nation state level itself. We are trying to decipher the horizons based on nation state decisions, right? So, for example, after 1978, Deng Xiaoping goes to Japan and says, you are now the teachers and we are the students. For a Chinese leader to go and say this to Japanese government, given the history between the two countries, is really big, right? They are taking the long view in that sense, right? Or saying that we have to learn from the West. We'll send our advisors to Japan and to Singapore and to US to learn, and then we'll improve. This is taking the long view, right? It is a revealed preference of the government that it is saying we don't know what will Xi Jinping do something like this? No, right? So in that sense, the revealed preference of government action suggests that the horizons that they were thinking of has changed. That's what I mean.
So, one thing I would add here is scale effects. Both the examples that you gave, which is Britain sort of underestimating, the United States and creating both an ally and in the process an impossible adversary, and then United States making the same mistake. I'm reminded of this quote that the great James Buchanan used to open his classes and seminars for the semester with this question. He would say that if a fly becomes 9 times its size, it can no longer fly. What happens when a government becomes 9 times its size? And he was obviously talking about public choice and public finance. But I think that's a relevant question in geopolitics also, because a lot of these norms and ideas that we have, they come from a very Eurocentric world, which are typically not Republican governments. They came, even if they were democratic, they came from monarchies. Some of these Scandinavian or British or Swiss monarchies, you could trace them back for centuries. And they were all relatively small trading powers. So while there were enormous gains from trade and so on and so forth, they were all of roughly similar size, right? It's only for the first time with the USSR and the United States that we see scale effects, operate in a big way. And I think that would be the third layer I add, other than short term and long term. And the United States made that same mistake by underestimating China and its scale effects, right? So, for instance, any other country, if you impose sanctions on them, or if you say, we're not going to export chips to you and so on, they can't do very much. They have to figure out some kind of deal, or, they have to go behind their back and buy it from a third party. China actually has the scale to say, you know what? Hold my beer. I can start making my own chips. I just need 2 years of side deals before I start doing it. So that, I think, is the part that we keep misunderstanding. The second odd thing that I observed when you guys were talking is normally we have long-term views held in democratic governments. And the reason is that there needs to be some shared set of norms, because everything else is changing, right? You're agreeing based on a broader compact that you're going to have bloodless change in power, and you can't nominate or choose or decide the guy who comes after you, right? Which means only if we have a shared set of norms can we make sure that the next guy doesn't burn the place down and I don't come back to power standing on rubble. So democratic politics typically very counterintuitively has a long run effect, whereas dictatorships tend to be quite short term, right? And what we've seen in the last 30-40 years is kind of the opposite in some sense. Like Deng Xiaoping really took the long view and managed to appoint the next two successors. Singapore took the very long view before it turned democratic. Same with South Korea. And the dictators in Africa, the ones that survive for a really long time. It's the African countries that are sort of trying to experiment with democratic politics are the ones that keep kind of regressing back into some kind of conflict. So I think there is something, here that we need to resolve in terms of, what is that model through which we can talk about democratic governments having a long view, and are all democratic governments adhering to that same idea, or are there categories, based on whether you're a monarchy or whether you had democracy for a really long period of time and so on?
Yeah, so whenever I am in a geopolitics related conversation, this is taken for granted that the authoritarian governments actually take the long view because they don't have to go through these elections, and the politician is not there just for 4 or 5 years, right? So in that sense, that's always the starting point of the conversation, that this is a weakness, and then how can we think long term, like the authoritarian governments are able to think? So
But I would say that's not empirically well held. I mean, that may be the starting point for conversations in geopolitics, and I don't know how empirically driven geopolitical experts are, but the evidence doesn't hold in its favor.
I think from a former professional gambler's point of view, I would say that an authoritarian government probably has higher variance. That, with a democratic government, you can get a certain predictable baseline of long-term thinking, whereas with an authoritarian government, when it works out well, as with Deng or as with Singapore, you can, get a very high level of that. But most of the time, you're far more likely to fail spectacularly.
yeah, and I think people make the mistake of confounding actions with outcomes, right? Because an authoritarian government will always be centralized. You will see it will have some plan of, I'll make this great global governance initiative for 10 years. And people will say, wow, he's thinking 20, 30 years down the line. But they are mistaking that action, and always, right, even in information warfare, etc., because the authoritarian thing is more centralized, it appears to have more purpose, it appears to be more driven, whereas there will be things happening in a decentralized way in a democracy which people will not notice.
No, and there's a danger of the survivorship bias at play, that you look at the authoritarian countries where the high variance kicked in and it really worked out, and you think, oh, authoritarianism is a way to go. But I think overall, not, the floor of authoritarian governments would be so low that overall it would be minus EV. But I guess people's appetite for risk varies. Let's go on to your third framework, Pranay.
So now we've tried to establish two things. First, the old order which existed before no longer exists, and it existed because the US had both power and legitimacy, that is authority. And also, we got to where we are now because the US actually rationally enabled China's rise because of mismatched time horizons, and we discussed that it is not such exceptional thing. There are many other powers that have done that. Now, let's come to the important question. Fine, world, the old order is changing, we are in a disorder, but what is replacing it? How do we think of the world order which is emerging, right? Will it be a Chinese order? Will it be another Cold War where both China and US are contesting, right? So in that sense, this is an exercise we did in Takshashila Institution 7 or 8 years ago, that we tried to map out what are the various scenarios in which the world might transition to, right? And we can't predict the future, but we can at least create some scenarios and then try to map the current world onto those scenarios, right? So when we started doing that, what we thought are that in order to imagine different worlds which might come up, you have to come up with two axes, right? Two most important, most uncertain axes. Which are they? First is the political one, which is obvious that there will be. So this is what you can see on the screen now, where I've tried to put the geopolitical trends and the geoeconomic trends on two axes, right? So geopolitics wise, it's similar. We are just looking at the distribution of power. So whether US is the sole superpower or whether there is a cooperative G2. G2 means US and China both at the top, and the third, fourth country are way below that. They have to just ally in with one or the other, right? So in that sense, cooperative G2, then cooperative G2, where there's a mix of competition and confrontation happening, or new Cold War, where there is actually a lot of contestation, lot of semi below military warfare, a lot of things happening. And then there's a multipolar world where the power is more distributed amongst various regions, right? So this is on the political side. And on the geoeconomic side, this we should not forget, because the supply chains, the trade, inflation, all these will also determine what kind of world we'll emerge in, right? So on that, we had tried to divide it into four kinds of trends. One is the great disruption, which becomes very relevant with AI now in the picture, because the great disruption can actually mean very different things in terms of what it means for trade, economic growth, etc. Right. So the great disruption is one trend. The second one is a new economic boom, where there is, not due to AI, but generally there is good global growth, like the time we had between 2002 to 2008, roughly. So trade is on the up. World is happy trading with each other. World is only looking at positive sum games, so on and so forth. Then other two are slightly negative trends, which are secular stagnation or a global recession, right? And these were kind of things which we saw during COVID-19. By the way, this framework was created before COVID-19, so it is useful to see how it tries to place us in today's world, right? So now with these trends, you actually have 20 scenarios, right? And we try to map how the world will look in each of these 20 different kinds of scenarios. What does it mean for the world? And then we also try to derive what does it mean for India. But we are not going to the India question right now. So now if you use this framework, it tries to give you, it's a map on which you can try to locate where the world is today, right? So I would argue that since 2020, when COVID also happened, so that's why the economic dimension is important. We entered into this phase of secular stagnation, right? So, and US China confrontation also started. Both took sort of, US took the long time horizon as well. So you had this period where we entered a new Cold War kind of an era. So we were at the intersection of secular stagnation and new Cold War, the period which we call the Great Walls, right? So that's where we ended up being. And now you can try to look at where we are today, right? If AI's promise holds and there is a big boom in terms of economic growth, investment, then we might actually move to the new technology race scenario, which you see on the top right. Or if there is no such disruption which happens, which is unlikely, but if during COVID period we were thinking whether we might go from the secular stagnation to global recession, and hence go into this period called race to the bottom. On the political side, there are different axes we can go to, right? Whereas with the Trump administration, we are seeing there are attempts sometimes to go from the new Cold War period to sometimes find attempts at having a modus vivendi with China. So they are sometimes thinking of this cooperative G2, where Trump has actually put a lot of more restrictions and tariffs on allies rather than China, right? So what does that signal to the allies itself? So in that sense, you might move from this new Cold War era trend to cooperative G2 as well. So now we can try to locate ourselves. There is roughly between pragmatic competition scenario on your screen and race to the bottom. We are in between that zone as of today, and people can try to imagine where this world goes, how does it transition. And I thought this will be a useful map to talk to with people. So Amit and Shruti, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I mean, this is incredibly useful. In fact, it's almost too much of a framework, Pranay, because I feel like I'm able to absorb things in like 2x2 frameworks, 3x3. When it comes to a 5x5, it's like slowly my brain starts trying to work out the various alternatives, and somewhere everything just starts melting down. But if I'm not in the business of making predictions in some sense, but there is no question that we are in a new tech race, right? So there is a huge disruption. And I feel like AI has created a twofold disruption, right? The last disruption we had like this, which was the digital disruption in the 1990s with the internet, it was largely a software disruption without huge sort of reworking of all the hardware behind it. I mean, eventually, of course, there were American companies that started manufacturing in China, and, China became this huge sort of electronics and hardware behemoth and things like that. But it still feels like this is a slightly different time where everything from mining and rare earths and space programs down to every single supply chain, import and export controls when it comes to, hardware like chips and other kinds of hardware, to finally whether models will be openly weighted, whether models will have access, and what can be released both domestically, internationally. This just feels like a very different time, probably because the disruption is a so big, and two, the disruption is moving so swiftly. Like, I have lived through the 1990s digital disruption, and it was crawling at a snail's pace compared to what we are going through now, right? Like, every week or every other week there's literally a new model which phenomenally outperforms its previous model. Every couple of months there's a new lab. So I feel we are very much in that great disruption, new tech race space. And I don't know if it's pragmatic. It doesn't feel that way yet. And it still feels very much like a new Cold War, at least when it comes to the AI disruption, because it's not yet a multipolar world. It's only the United States and China who are at the frontier, developing models and so on. And the next set of players, whether it's India, whether it's France, they don't seem to be on the horizon yet. So just when it comes to AI tech disruption, I don't see a multipolar world yet. And I think that is what is going to be the new currency. It'll be the new oil, or the new, the new currency for what determines what kind of a world we reorganize into. So I would phrase it as we are in the new Cold War and new technology race.
If I could add to that, this era is also changing the governance of international players a lot, right? In the sense, like, just think about US government policy. They are taking Department of War has taken stake in rare earth firms. OpenAI is offering 5% equity to the US government. Like, it is so weird, right? Like, you would think, are they making it a PSU? But that's how that probably didn't happen as much in the era you mentioned about internet, etc.
Yeah, and the way it happened was also quite different, Pranay. So, I mean, you would lobby the Department of Defense saying a particular kind of wool or a particular kind of mohair is so important for, naval uniforms or something like that, that needs to have high tariffs or protectionism. So it would be a very limited thing, and it would be like quite nakedly rent seeking. You could see that all these arms companies and anyone who's trying to use a US security reason was doing it. But this feels, as you're entirely right, this feels very, very different. Even the arms companies did not suggest that the US government take a stake in them. This just feels fundamentally different. And I don't know if it's because of Trump and the nature of current US politics, where the greater protection is to, get in bed with the devil, or there is something fundamentally different about the technology and what is at stake when it comes to capital requirements and scaling and volatility. So I'm not able to parse that apart yet. I think we'll only know that in hindsight.
No, this was quite a masterclass. And if you watching this are as impressed as I am, I would simply say that you have to check out Takshashila's many courses. They have great courses on public policy. We all know that. But they have courses on foreign policy as well. You get to learn from the best, like Pranay here. It's an incredible place, intellectually stimulating. Whenever I go to Bangalore, I hang out at the Takshashila office, and just great minds all around. Pranay, of course, being, in my view, the foremost.
Sorry to interrupt. The other thing I would add is Takshashila is the only place that has multiple China watchers, in India, where you have different people looking at China, all have slightly different points of view and also follow the different aspects of China. So if you're serious about beginning to learn more about China and how to, I think what I find the hardest when it comes to China is I don't even know where to begin the process of forming my worldview about China, right? Having not been there or not knowing the language and so on. So for that in particular, I would really point our listeners towards Takshashila and its various China experts who can, who you will see on the screen.
And there's a course for that called Watching China, for people who want to learn how to watch China.
Yeah, I have a bunch of I have a bunch
Yes.
of episodes with Manoj Keval Rumani, who's Sakshashila's China expert. Great minds there. And, but to end this section, I want to end not with a disagreement or a question, but really a lament, which is that when we think of the domestic economy, when we think of society, we think in terms of positive sum games everywhere. Everything is double thank you moments. And it's always perturbed me a bit that foreign policy always thinks of the world as zero sum games. In Pranay's notes for this episode, I saw the term offensive realism. There was a point of view that if there's a great power, they have to watch out for other powers becoming as great as them. And this zero sum view of the world, the adversarial view of the world, really disturbs me. Like the other day, I was telling someone that, hey, what is good for China is good for India too. And what is good for US is good for India too. And that's the perhaps naive way in which I look at the world, that if my neighbor does well, I do well too. If other podcasters gain an audience, that's there for me too. But somehow, what is true in the economy, what is true in not in the world of disorder but in the world of spontaneous order, which is that everything is positive sum, it seems that the dominant mindset in foreign policy is that it is very much zero sum, and a lot of the time negative sum, because all adversarial conflicts are negative sum. Both parties suffer, especially in the extreme case of actual war. And I wonder if that can ever change, or it is just the nature of the beast that it will always be that way.
So people did have other theories, right? So there was the theory of liberalism in international relations, which said that, over time, even authoritarian regimes will change and they'll see the light about positive sum game and benefits. There was the theory of constructivism, which says that it's not about realism. We really think of our threats depending on our own mindset, right? So elites can change the way other countries are perceived. So that was the idea of constructivism. But empirically, at least based on many of the conflicts that has happened, realism seems to have more explanatory power. I don't think it explains everything, but in terms of all these, it has more explanatory power. And yeah, unfortunately, it is Matsyana, it is zero sum game. And even I struggle with this, but that's the part of trying to have this two different ideas at the same time, that when we are talking about domestic affairs, the things are very different. There is a moral authority, there is the constitution, whereas in international affairs, unfortunately, it isn't.
I will take a slightly different view on this because I have been part of the generation that enjoyed the global order, which was not a zero sum game. Right, I am that generation where we saw so many developing countries actually join GATT and WTO, which was originally a platform only for rich countries to trade with each other. Again, I'm the generation that saw the EU come together under a common single economic union and eventually a single currency. So now they have pluses and minuses, but the very fact that this could happen, I mean, if you really think about it, Europe was full of warring tribes who were literally like burning each other a few centuries ago. They were just warring over the littlest of things about a century ago. And now they're a single trade union, a single immigration unit, and a single currency. It's extraordinary what we've managed to do. So actually, I have a very, very different opinion. I feel like we have managed to create sort of this positive sum gain out of what used to traditionally be only zero sum games. And that is part of human ingenuity, and that's part of the incredible nature of the rules based order.
All right, now we move to the section where we make fools of ourselves, which is the infinite game. At this time, the host for the infinite game is Shruti. So, Shruti, over to you. What question have you brought for us?
I am really excited about this week's Infinite Game, and it'll be relatively short because the list is relatively short. So, as we know, the Constituent Assembly of India had, both elected and nominated or appointed representatives. But the list I am focused on is it had 15 women. Okay. And this includes women who were there for a short period and had to leave and go on to take other appointments. It includes women who resigned, and it includes women who served the entire period. So I'm counting all 15 of these women. And so who were the 15 women?
Okay, I will graciously allow Pranay to start first, because if he gets it wrong, I know I have to get one name.
Rajkumari Amrit Kaur.
That's a correct name.
Jesus Christ. I vaguely remember in an earlier episode you said Durgabhai Deshmukh was part of the planning commission, but no, she would not have risen to prominence so early. I am wondering if I should. Okay, I have two names on my mind.
Amit,
Sh-
I think you got it.
oh, I did. You think I got it?
Yeah,
Okay, so Durgabhai Deshmukh.
yeah.
Thank you for helping me out.
No, no, wait. Now there are many more names that are just not coming on top of my mind. Wait.
And think of women during that time. So there's a big overlap in also like women who were quite famous in the nationalist movement and things like that.
Hansa Mehta.
Bingo. She's another one. She came
Okay,
from Bombay. She was elected. Fantastic.
I might get it wrong, but Sarojini Naidu, who was president of Congress in 1925, would have been prominent around this time also.
That's exactly
So,
right.
so Sarojini Naidu is my guess.
Yes, and she
Okay,
came representing Bihar.
magnificent. Well done, Amit.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay, there's one name that I am forgetting. There was a Dalit woman from Kerala who was a Gandhian, and she had views which were different from Ambedkar, and they had this tiff in the assembly as well.
Yes.
But the name escapes me.
Why
Mm.
don't I give you a hint? The name includes the region she's from or direction, like north, south, east, west.
Dakshin, wait, yes.
You're on the right track.
Okay. I can guess the first name, but I don't know anybody with that first name.
Go for it. And her initials are DV. I know. I feel like we should give this to Pranay. He's really close. He's given more
Daksh,
description about her than
yeah.
No,
anything
no, no,
else.
no, no, no.
You
You
know,
can't, you can't, you can't. Has to get a proper name, yaar.
Okay,
ऐसा
okay,
थोड़ी
okay.
ना.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
being generous. I am a generous host of the Infinite
yeah.
Game.
No, but then you're being cruel to me, no, if you're
Velayudhan,
generous to.
Velayudhan, Velayudhan.
That's right. Dakshayani
Yeah,
Velayudhan. That's
Dakshayani.
right. Well done, you. He got it.
Okay, cool. Is surname enough?
Surname is also good enough. But it can't be like the most generic surname, huh?
No,
It
no, no,
can't.
no. Obviously,
You can't
obviously,
say
I'm not going to.
Patel. So
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to say Singh. Uh, so I have one full name and no, actually, I have three names,
Oh,
but I
Amit.
don't know if any of them will be relevant. If I ask you a question, will you? It'll serve as a clue.
I'm
If you
being
can,
so
I do that.
generous with hints. Go
Okay.
for it.
Was this person ever India's representative to the United Nations? Any of them?
Yes. Yes.
Vijayalakshmi Pandit?
Yes. And she actually resigned,
Hmm.
from the Constituent Assembly before the Constituent Assembly finished its work to become the first UN woman president, the first woman president of the UN General Assembly. So very well done, you.
Thank you. On the way to Pranay now, I have two guesses, so at least I have names. Do you have names, Pranay?
No, no, no. I don't. See,
Okay.
I have descriptions, but I don't have names.
I
That's
have,
the
Description नहीं
guys,
होता
there are
भाई.
a couple of names that are still like well known women.
No clues.
Uh, Yeah,
Stop.
so I'm just saying they're well-known women. They're not
Yeah.
like
Okay.
Velayudhan, where you may have only heard about them in the context of the Constituent Assembly. They were well-known
yeah.
outside of it also.
Come on. I know there was a Muslim woman from, I think, Assam or UP, one of these places, but I somehow again it
From
escapes me.
UP.
From UP, right?
Nothing else.
Okay. Wait, Amit.
I'm
There
giving
are
both of
some
you same level of hints, okay? I'm not being
popular
partial.
name that I am missing out. So, okay. But Punjab I have covered. No. Okay. Amit, you go.
You give up. So if I get it right, I win, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh shit, which of these two names do I go with? Okay, Sara Bhai.
No.
Shit. Would Bhatt have
And
been
I don't
right?
even know which Sarabhai you're talking about at this point.
Well, there are
But
there are multiple ones. There is Anusuya Sarabhai, who had interesting debates with
yes,
Gandhi in the 20s. She was a trade union leader, formidable woman.
yeah,
So I thought maybe it could be her.
not her.
I think then her niece was, I think, this some
Yeah,
other
she would have been too
Mrinalini
young for
Sarabhai.
that.
Yeah. So
What was the
okay,
other
and
name?
I was thinking Ela Bhatt, but she would have been too young also.
Yeah, neither of them.
Um,
The names which I was thinking, which are really popular, is Sucheta Kriplani.
oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, who came elected from United Provinces or UP. I will give you a few others and also some interesting bits of trivia around them if that's fun. So in alphabetical order, there's Amu Swaminathan who came from Madras. She actually co-founded the Women's India Association and then eventually went on to the Rajya Sabha. Annie Mascarin, who was from Kochi Travancore and became the first female MP from, post-independent Kerala. Pranay, the Muslim woman you were talking about from UP is Begum Aizaz Rasul. Okay. And she actually was the only person who had argued for separate electorates. Then you have Kamala Chaudhary, another very famous person, Hindi short story writer, among many other things, came from Uttar Pradesh United Provinces. Leela Roy from Bengal, who actually resigned in protest against partition and then quit very early on. I think she had maybe a few months in the Constituent Assembly and then quit to go run relief camps. You have Malati Chaudhary from Orissa, who's probably one of the lesser known. Again, also resigned very early to go run, Gandhi's peace mission and run the relief camps post partition. You have Purnima Banerjee, who is the sister of Aruna Asaf Ali. And was also part throughout. I mean, she was there for the whole period. And you have Renuka Ray, who represented India in the UN General Assembly and then, went on to do other things. And I think that completes the list of 50.
So I have one thing to say to the viewers and another thing to say to Shruti. To the viewers, I want to say that you might be judging us that, hey, Amit and Pranay don't know anything about the women in the Constituent Assembly. But I want to assure you that if we were asked a question about the men, we would also flounder as badly, I suspect. So
Except there are
keep,
299
keep
to
that
pick
in
from.
mind. And the other thing I want to say to Shruti is that the idea of the infinite game is that you pick something that both of the participants will know something about, not something that they know nothing about and you know everything about. So
No,
that's what
so
you
the
did this
reason
time.
no, so the reason I picked this was twofold. One, because I want the viewers to have some fun, right? And I guess they are also guessing and playing along with us, which is what I understand from the one, infinite game we've done so far and the pilot episode. But the second reason was that one of the Takshashila alums had written this wonderful essay, and she worked, I think, with Amit on Pragati. I'm talking about Priya, right? And also was one of Pranay's colleagues who had done this wonderful series on 15 women in the Indian Constituent Assembly. So I just thought that this is something you guys have read and would know. So there was a reason for picking the niche subject.
Fair enough, but now you owe us a tiebreaker. So,
I,
just come up with the fastest finger first. Whichever one of us says the answer first wins. The
okay.
only one answer, and whichever is fastest wins. Let's go.
Does the tiebreaker have to be something to do with this?
No.
Which one of these women served on the drafting committee?
Hansa Mehta.
Sucheta Kripalani.
None of the above, actually.
Another tiebreaker.
That was well done.
We need
Okay,
another
Sarojini
tiebreaker.
Naidu. Sarojini Naidu.
What about her? She's our tiebreaker.
Yeah, I'm saying she's the one. She's the answer to your tiebreaker
No,
question.
none of
Is
the
it?
above. None of the 15 women were on the drafting committee.
Oh, okay.
That's the joke.
So both of us were right.
Both of you were right.
Amit.
One more tiebreaker. Okay, what
Okay.
kind of tiebreaker do I? I am also googling the answer to this.
This has suddenly become a test for Shruti more than for us.
Okay, actually, I knew the answer. Okay, perfect. Who's the first female speaker of the Lok Sabha? ये तो हमारे lifetime में हुआ है, guys.
Sumitra Mahajan.
No.
Okay, so now I get time to think about my हमारे lifetime में है Pranay must be in his 30s, so this is post 80s, therefore Pratibha Patil.
No. God, you both are really not good at this. Don't you guys watch Lok
Okay,
Sabha
wait,
TV?
Sumitra
Oh,
Mahajan
that-
was correct, but not the first.
Correct. Yeah. So we can give him half a point. It's
Yeah.
Meera
No,
Kumar.
no half points. No, you said first.
Yeah.
No half
Okay.
points.
Meera
What's the answer?
Kumar is the answer.
Oh, yeah.
Meera Kumar.
Okay.
I can spell her name. I don't know if he can.
Okay,
Sure.
let's try spelling her name.
Miera.
Wrong.
Wrong.
That's how she spelled it. That's why I said I can because it's
Meira.
MEIRA. Okay, Jesus Christ. Getting this.
This may be correct.
I'm sorry, this is only getting worse. I think we have to cut this.
Can you ask something which is not about women? Let a man be the answer. Let's see if we get it.
Something which is not about women. Okay.
Or
Yeah.
something which is about women we might know something about. Like, first woman poker player to win a WSOP bracelet or something.
See,
Okay.
I told you this is the
okay,
section.
this has to be easier. Who is the first speaker of the Lok Sabha? Not woman, just the very first speaker of the Lok Sabha.
I forgot.
And
I
note,
actually
I
know
called it
this.
Lok Sabha, which means it is post first general election. So 1952. This
Give clue.
tiebreak.
Give a clue. You are dealing with two severely incompetent and ignorant people. What do you expect? It
You
is
guys are
neatly-
not incompetent and ignorant.
I actually know this,
Okay.
but it's not coming to my head. So if you give a clue of some sort.
Okay, so he is Marathi but from Gujarat.
Morarji Desai, of course not. Of course not. Scratch that.
Okay, I'll give you one more hint. He co-founded the Ahmedabad Education Society.
None of us studied in Ahmedabad. I can tell you the co-founders of the Deccan Education Society I know. But Ahmedabad, dude, you are...
Okay, his initials are GVM. I'm
G.V.
sorry.
Malvankar.
There we go.
Okay, you win.
Mavlankar.
Uh,
But it's
I'm-
close enough that we will give it to you.
I'm just
Yes.
glad it's over. Well, congratulations,
Yes.
Pranay. I'm very happy for you. Yeah.
Guys, I didn't think I picked something that bad.
so, Amit, next time you know what to do.
Oh boy. Yeah,
And
I know.
what
Next
we
time I'm going to
have-
get
you-
shafted.
you-
I know.
Yeah, you're setting the next one, Pranay, so we will...
Yes.
Okay, my deepest apologies.
All right, Pranay and I have been suitably humiliated, and as you would have found out by now, the Shruti knows a lot of trivia. So here's our next section, Trivia I Love. Shruti, go for it. Tell us some trivia you love, which you haven't told us already earlier in the episode.
Okay, this is musical and geopolitical and many other things, and it also includes the greats like Anu Malik. Okay, so there is a patriotic song from a Hindi movie. This is an old movie from 1996 called Dil Jale with the great Ajay Devgan. Anu Malik, composed the songs, and in this instance, copied a song, and Javed Akhtar wrote the lyrics. So there's this song called Mera Mulk Mera Desh, which, we'll throw in the YouTube link, is quite popular at that time. And a few years after this came out, I realized that Anu Malik had copied the exact tune of the Israeli national anthem. Okay, so I think the movie released in 1996, and this must have been the early 2000s, and must have been watching some sporting event where the Israeli national anthem is playing, and I'm like, wait a minute, isn't this the same song? Now, it just so happens that thanks to the internet, there are many, many, many people who've made this connection, not just me. And a lot of these people have actually put both the songs side by side. It's like the melody is a note for note, copy almost. Now, what is even more interesting? Well, both these songs are patriotic, right? So you have the Hatikwa, which is the Israeli national anthem. Now, I fell down a rabbit hole because, of course, I fell down the rabbit hole. I started talking to people about the Israeli national anthem. Now, the interesting thing is that melody is also not original. Okay, so in Shmuel Cohen, who was a Jewish immigrant from Romania, he adapted Imber's original poem, and the melody he used was from a famous Romanian folk song. Okay, it's called Carul Cubua, which means ox cart. Now, that melody is also copied. Okay. And it is
Amazing.
derived from a great, this is one of the great Renaissance Italian songs. It's called La Mantovana. And it was published originally somewhere in the 1600s. I don't have an exact date, by Giuseppe Cenci. And it is, a popular Italian song that is still performed. And separate from the Romanian song, Smetana also used the exact same melodic line in one of his movements. This keeps getting better. And the movement is, this is a Czech song. So it's the Vltava, which is the musical or the musical portrait. And the specific movement for which this particular tune was used was called Ma Vlast, which translates to my homeland. Which incidentally are also the lyrics of the Anu Malik Javed Akhtar song Mera Mulk Mera Desh. So there is something about this particular tune which just lends itself to plagiarism and adaptation and copying. And I'm very thrilled about this. And hats off to Anu Malik that he knew exactly what he was doing. He's one of the greats.
I'm just imagining a scenario where Anu Malik didn't copy from the Israeli national anthem. He copied from the Italian song, and then he heard the Israeli national anthem, and he got in touch with that composer and says कि तूने भी वो Italian गाना सुना? And that guy said, not in Hindi of course, कि no bro, मैंने तो Romanian से लिया. And a little bit of gossip to go with this. Obviously, I can't give names, but there was this very famous incident in journalism circles a few years ago when there was a very senior editor at a Delhi magazine which was founded in the 1970s. And this senior editor was having an affair with a colleague while he was already married. So his wife was at home, his mistress was in his office, and one day the office wakes up to see that the mistress is screaming at this editor at the top of her voice because she has just found out that he has another mistress. So yeah, so it doesn't strike her that, wait a minute, he's cheating on his wife with me. She's angry because he's cheating on his mistress with another mistress. So this sounds like a very Anu Malik Romanian song.
When did this man actually do any editing work? That sounds like a full-time job. A wife and two mistresses. No.
See, मैं बॉम्बे वाला हूँ. ये दिल्ली के एलीट लोग सब ऐसे ही है, no respect at all, और जर्नलिज्म वाले तो ऐसे ही. And I don't want to give clues away as to who the guy. Maybe after the recording I'll let you know. So yeah,
sure. We live for gossip. Okay, so now we're at the recommendation stage of the show. So, Amit, what recommendation do you have for us today?
So one quote that I love telling my writing students about is George Orwell's famous quote, "Good prose is like a window pane." Today I'm going to recommend a book not about prose but about design. This is a beautiful book called The Design of Everyday Things by Dan Norman. And in this book, there's a striking passage where he says that good design is actually something that should be invisible. That if you notice the design, there is a problem with the design. Good design takes in account human instincts and intuitions. A classic example of this is, take a door. Let's say there's a handle on a door, right? The instinct is to pull the handle. Let's say there's a flat panel on the door. The instinct is to push the handle. This is an example of good design where you don't think about, do I push or do I pull? The design itself tells you whether you push or pull. And in fact, there's a whole category of doors now called Norman doors, which don't follow this rule, after Don Norman, who spoke about it. So the design of everyday things will open your eyes to the beautiful design of all the things that are around you. Like Shruti, in an earlier episode, you spoke about John Collison's quote about how the world is a museum of passion projects. Every object around us is something that has come through a process of natural selection. It is beautiful. We don't notice it. The coffee mug, the way the handle is shaped, the way that you pick it up, the our tables, our chairs are all designed for a reason. If you notice the design, it is probably bad design, right? You will often find that in some cafes, like the handle of the cup will be so low that your center of gravity is shaking as you pick it up. That's bad design, right? If a user is having trouble navigating a particular object, it is not the fault of the user, it is the fault of the design. And this is a book that will open your eyes to this. And design as a metaphor extends to everything, to how we design our lives, in fact. And it tells you that design and function go well beautifully together. So this is a masterpiece. It's an essential book every person should read. So read it now, not quite now. First, before you go to read this book, I want you to like, I want you to share, I want you to subscribe, I want you to send this link to everyone you think might be interested. And only then, when that is done, and perhaps leave an appreciative comment, and only then, after that is done, go and pick up The Design of Everyday Things by Mr. Norman.
Pranay, what do you have to recommend this week?
Yeah, so I have a book to recommend, but before that, I have a question for you folks. So, can you tell me the sports in which women are better than men in any sport that you know?
I actually know of only one, which is severe long distance running, severe, like ultra levels, like 500 kilometers and all. I think at those levels sometimes women actually do really well, but apart from that, I'm afraid I can't think of any sport.
Shruti? That is right.
Yeah, I would have said walking, like long distance walking, more than running, but I imagine like our intuition is the same.
Okay, so it's long distance swimming, then shooting also, and equestrian. These are
Oh, yeah, of
things in
course. I
which
should have known
uh,
that.
yeah. So you missed that. But this comes from a book called The Boundary Lab. Actually, it's a lovely book. I think the best book I have read on the politics of sport, the governance of sport. It has questions like, pickleball, which is now pretty popular in many places in India. What does it How does a pickleball thing transition from an activity to a sport? What are the steps that it has to take? So I found this very interesting. There are chapters on gender, there are chapters on sports governance bodies. How are they governed in various parts of the world? Particularly the structure we have in India is quite intriguing. So for me, it was a very nice read. I'll recommend it to anyone who is interested in sport.
And Shruti, what do you have for us today?
I have a music recommendation, which is my favorite kind of recommendation. So this week it is actually the Goldberg variations composed by Bach, and it is Glenn Gould's piano rendition of the variations. So, as many of you know, Johann Sebastian Bach is one of the most prolific classical music composers, and this is true across instruments, across forms. And the Goldberg variations are quite interesting. They are sort of the highest mountain to climb for some of the classical pianists. So it starts with an aria, and then there are 30 variations of that aria. Right. And the Goldberg variations are sort of, only the very best of the very best pianists even attempt something like that. And you can think of it as, Bach almost setting up a musical exercise of sorts. And what makes it very difficult in the modern age, even more so than when he set it up, is he didn't actually write it for the modern piano. So he wrote it for the harpsichord, and it had two different keyboards of some sort. And now that needs to, sort of be transcribed and played on a single piano. Glenn Gould, of course, is one of the greatest pianists that we've ever had. He recorded this particular version. He recorded it twice, to the best of my knowledge. But the great version he recorded in 1955, which is the LP that I was just showing all of you. Apparently, he recorded it again very late in his life, but the tempos were quite different, in that recording. So this is available on YouTube, and you can hear the Goldberg variations played by pretty much any of the great pianists. So I very strongly recommend that if you haven't heard Bach or the Goldberg variations, that you give it a listen.
So, dear viewers, thank you for watching so far. This is a labor of love. This is a positive sum game, unlike what is happening in geopolitics. There's geopolitics on one side, there is watching the wheels on the other side, right? We believe in peace, we believe in harmony, we believe in your liking, sharing, and subscribing. We really, really believe in that. So, kindly do that. Show us your love. We will be back next week. Will you be back next week? Bye.